So we will start off with NDOT and Mr. Smith, and it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Senator Mishler and members of the committee. My name is Mike Smith, NDOT's commissioner. Joining me today is my CFO, Joe Gustin. We'll go through some agency priorities, and then I'll kick it off to Joe to talk about our budget request and our financial matters for the agency. I just want to highlight Indiana was named the I just want to highlight that Indiana was named the #1 state for infrastructure, so a big thank you to our legislative partners and others. Certainly we understand that NDOT is not the only one that's involved with making Indiana #1 for infrastructure, but we are very proud of our state's standing as it relates to infrastructure. A bit about NDOT at a glance. Obviously, we've got 6 districts, and many of you network directly with our field teams to solve issues in your districts. I just want to highlight that our teams are at the ready, stand at the ready to solve issues and problems as they arise. Highlighting our expenditures for FY22, $4 billion budget, $2.55 billion of that in state capital expenditures, $571 million operating budget, and then $882 million for our local capital program with our local municipalities, multimodal, and our debt service. Highlighting agency goals for the upcoming year, we've got 4 of them. Excellence in core service delivery. So essentially the upshot there is continuing to deliver on our 20-year plan, and then committing to making our processes better. So adhering to how we deliver that basic 20-year plan. Additionally, planning for the future. Thanks to the funding, we have a more comprehensive and programmatic view of issues like sustainability, resiliency, access, equity, and innovation. And additionally, we're looking for a programmatic lens in our project decisions around economic development and quality of life, as well as in our efforts for talent attraction and retention. Sorry about that. Enhance internal services, so embracing collaboration with internal and external partners, so making closer partnerships with our fellow agency to make what we do better, optimizing internal customer service, and advancing, again, our 21st century workforce. Last one is internal partnership. I personally have invested a lot of time in getting to know and meet with members of our legislature, our industry, our federal partners, and stakeholders across the state and really the nation in terms of partnership. We'll continue to ask every member of our agency to make similar investments. So again, just to highlight specifically our capital program investment for fiscal 22, a $2.5 billion program that is construction and project development costs to deliver those projects. For 21 and 22, 449 capacity or preservation of roadway projects for about 4,700, 4,800 miles of roadway, and then 1,365 bridges that were rehabilitated, replaced, built, or maintained. Just to update on key projects that we have going across the state. Between 2017 and 2037, we will have invested $60 billion in preservation and construction projects. Major project updates, double tracking the South Shore and the West Lake extension up on NICTE's commuter rail project is going along and on time and on budget, progressing nicely. US 30 and 31 will make $308 million worth of investments between now and 2028. And as I think members of the committee know, we continue a planning and environmental linkage study on both 30 and 31 to study alternatives access and gain public input on desires for both of those corridors. I-69 finish line is on time and moving along nicely. We'll get into the more complex portion of the project as we approach Marion County, the 465 interchange, and then also some upgrades to 465 itself. We're in development on the ORX bridge to connect 69 through Kentucky. So that process continues. Sherman-Mitten is a bridge down by the Ohio River in Louisville. We continue to restore and preserve that so that we can utilize that bridge for another 30 years. I-65 and I-70, we did give an update that we will be, upon completion and opening of the full interchange at the North Split in downtown Indianapolis by the end of April of this upcoming year. And then the ClearPath 465 project is ongoing, and we'll let the second phase of that project later on this month. Earlier this week, we made awards to 229 separate communities for $119 million for our Community Crossings program. Since 2016, that contemplates an investment of state funds at over $1.25 billion. So again, very positive program, very transformative to our local communities, and we appreciate your support of being able to prioritize that. Just a little bit of an update on customer service. There are some of our major activities and their service level adherence, so quite strong overall in the yellow box. I would call your attention. Over 330,000 cases since 2018 and a 96% adherence to all of our customer service goals since, for calendar 22. I just want to take a minute to highlight our work zone safety efforts. So we've got several of them, obviously partnering with our ISP, Indiana State Police Forces on enforcement. Continue to support and advertise and talk about the 2020 Indiana Hands-Free Driving Law. Continuing to study automated queue and HOS alerts to potentially give real-time updates to the traveling public and others about dangerous conditions and workers in their area of travel. And then just highlighting our back of the queue trucks, which is pictured there. We put those in our most susceptible interstate jobs where queuing is as much of a problem. We've been able, since the inception of that program, to reduce 80% of crashes. Something like 1 out of every 200 hard braking events leads to a serious crash, and we've been able to significantly impact that number. I know that it'll be a conversation around camera enforcement in the work zone, and that continues to be a priority of our industry. And so certainly wanted to highlight that that would be a discussion that you will probably hear in the upcoming session. Challenges for INDOT. Just wanted to talk for a few minutes about what we're seeing on inflation to inform you. Certainly, we keep close track of commodities, and here is our latest information. So some commodities over 100% increase from Q3 of 2020 to Q2 of 22. Overall, on commodities, we're seeing an impact of about 43% across those that we track in terms of increased pricing. Challenge for INDOT, obviously, inflation is one of those things. We've been fortunate through the bipartisan infrastructure law to have additional formula funds to help us ease the burdens and concerns of inflation, but certainly those are wreaking havoc across projects across the state. In terms of erosion of buying power, we've additionally got the upcoming adoption of EV and hybrid vehicles that will be a risk. We anticipate, based off of our calculations, a $70 million impact in the next 5 years, and that grows potentially, again, these are projections, to a $1.9 billion impact in 15 years. I think you also know that the indexing clause for the gas tax is sunsetting in 2025. Again, not revenue that we're counting on, but just wanted to show the impact here in the 5-year window, $181 million impact, and over 15 years, $2.55 billion in impact of our ability to go do the work. In terms of the bipartisan infrastructure law, as I've talked about it, I've broken it down really into 2 buckets. There's a formula program, as you see in the table, in blue and light blue. We've listed the INDOT share and the local share. For fiscal '22, INDOT received an additional $156 million worth of formula funds on out to FY '26 at the end of the law at $233 million. The local share at 25%, so $52 million incremental impact in '22 and $77 million in '26. Now's the point of the presentation. I'll hand it over to my CFO to talk about the budget, but did want to characterize what we are looking to do. Our budget does not contemplate any new major programming, but simply allows us to weather increased labor costs and also the cost of inflation, which I've just articulated to you. So those are the major drivers of incremental budget ask. Joe?
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I'd be remiss if I first didn't mention that we appreciate what you did at your October meeting. You approved a cost increase request for us for our materials and test lab. And thanks to that, that work is continuing as we speak. So we appreciate that very much. This slide shows total funding starting with fiscal 18, which is actually the first year of our 20-year plan, next level roads construction. It shows a snapshot basically of all the resources that's invested by INDOT as well as the resources that we manage for others, which would be the federal aid share to the locals, their local match, and multimodal and community crossings. You'll notice that 22 and 23 appear to be exceptionally high years, which they were, and that's thanks in large part to federal stimulus funding. In 22, we received $177 million from CARES Act and $205 million from ARPA. And then 23, this fiscal year, we're deploying $900 million of additional federal ARPA funding. The next slide, I think, is probably one of the most important slides of all from the perspective of long-term strategy and planning. If you could just do a mental visualization of a straight line from 2018 up to fiscal 25. You'll see 2 big dips in that revenue, fiscal 20 and 21. That was obviously COVID-related when people were pulling back on their fuel consumption. In the biennium, 24 and 25, 83, almost 84% of our total state revenue comes from motor fuel taxation, and 21% of that comes from gasoline use tax, which, as you know, and we've seen in the last month, is very, very volatile pump price. Then if you would draw a mental visual straight line from 25 down to 35, you'll see that decreasing. Just a couple of reasons. First, as the commissioners mentioned, fuel tax indexing ceases in fiscal 25, so we'll begin seeing a reduction because of that, and then electric vehicle adoption. We think that over the biennium, the loss of revenue to INDOT from electric and hybrid vehicles will be about $20 million, and through 38, about $1.9 billion. And then the index loss then from 24 through 38 is about 2.55, as would mention. And these are losses to us, not of just potential revenue, and it does not include any inflationary impacts on our ability to buy things. But if you'd focus on 35, just very briefly, In 35, we're forecasting about a $283 million loss just from gas and diesel fuel indexing, and about $227 million loss in revenue from electric vehicles. So if you stack those two bars on top of the blue bar for fiscal 2035, that puts us from $1.6 billion up to about $2.1 billion. So that's the magnitude of loss that we're contemplating as we do a lot of our strategic long-range planning. Now, this next slide just shows the combined program of NDOT for capital and preservation, includes state and local. As you can see again, in fiscal 22 and 23 were big years for us due to the federal stimulus funding. During the biennium 24 and 25, nearly 93% of our capital program is going into preservation. In 23, this fiscal year, we had programmed 501 contracts for construction and preservation. 226 of those were through yesterday. And from today going forward, we have about another 275 contracts that will be put out for letting for the remainder of the fiscal year, totaling about $1.2 billion. So this next slide, this shows our proposed 24-25 biennium budget, which totals about $7.435 billion. And that comprises three general areas. First are the dollars that flow through NDOT and that we manage for local construction, which would be, excuse me, their federal aid portion and their matching share. Multimodal, $233 million, and that leaves direct to NDOT at $5.94 billion. And out of that $5.94 billion, if we take our operating budget, which I'll talk about in the next slide, of about $1.271 billion, you subtract about $200 million for our debt service and another $52 million for state planning and research, that leaves $4.416 billion for our construction program, which is the orange section of that pie chart. So we're a dedicated funding agency, as you know, and we set our priorities for our spending. First thing that we have to do is pay our debt service. The second thing is pay our labor and wages and benefits. And then we pay for the rest of our 0.2 through 0.9 operating expenses. And then after that, everything that's left goes into the capital and preservation program. So when we take the requirements of 1 through 3, what's left goes into the spending program for capital. That fluctuates with our revenue and funding. So over time, we see that number go up and down depending on our revenue forecasts and the amount of money we get from federal aid. But we always meet those first three obligations. This next slide is just a blow up of that $1.71 billion that we're requesting for our operating budget. And that totals $1.27 billion over the biennium. The biggest chunk of that, as you can see from the chart, is labor and benefits at about $681 million. This is not a reflection of any new programs. There are just very minor shifts back and forth in our head count. We're not anticipating any massive increases at all in head count. This just represents what we know as fixed, known, and measurable expenses for wage increases and benefits over the biennium. We've also programmed in our labor expense for a normal winter. When we get a normal winter, however you'd like to define that, we spend about $10 million a year in overtime. So that is also included, $10 million a year over the 2 years. Starting at the top then, going around, this committee's already looked at our buildings and ground budgets, so I'll skip that unless you have any questions later. The next component is maintenance equipment and vehicles at $77 million over the 2 years. I can tell you that there is one line item in that $77 million that makes up about 77 or 75% of that total, and that is the item for medium and heavy-duty trucks. So that one single item is preponderance of that $77 million. Next is our fuel and other supplies that are in the 0.2 through 0.9 groups of our operating budget. The major components there are motor vehicle parts and other supply, shop equipments and supplies, around $50 million over a year, or 2 years, I'm sorry. Utilities, electricity, water, sewer for all of our buildings at about 15 million or so. We have SWICAP in there, statewide area capital allocation. All of our IT costs, seat charges, cybersecurity is included in there, as well as maintenance contracts, administration, and our fuel. Fuel is obviously a big portion of that amount. In fiscal 22, we spent about $13.2 million on gasoline, diesel combined. At the time we put this chart together, which was not quite a month ago, we had spent $6.2 million in fuel through November, and we were on pace to get to $14 million in fiscal 23. But as you know, this last 30 days, we've seen fuel prices come down. So I think we're going to be able to come under that 14 million in fuel. Just a month ago, gasoline was like $4.18 a gallon. Now it's at $3.30, I think. So that's like a 20% decrease just in 30 days. Diesel was at $5.50. Now it's down to $5.30. So it's about a 4.5% increase. So we're seeing those costs come down. We don't know what's going to happen in the future exactly, but this is helping us quite a bit. So if you look at labor and maintenance, that's about 21% increase, all fixed, known, and measurable costs. Maintenance and vehicle equipment, about 15%. Fuel, other supplies, about 19.7, and maintenance work program, 13. That comes to about $95 million a year increase over our 23 base. And we average then around 18.5 increase for the biennium. So with that, I'd be happy. I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have.
Questions? Senator Fedora?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will seek forgiveness in advance, Mr. Chair, because I have a couple of questions. I know we're on limited time. Commissioner, thank you for your service. I enjoyed meeting with you at the award ceremony for the Community Crossings Program. I'll try to be very brief. My first question, do you have data that shows under the road funding infrastructure formula of county by county how much they contribute to the formula and how much they receive back under the formula?
Thank you, Senator. We don't have that data. I know that the amount that is received per county is, I believe, posted on the auditor's website.
Correct.
But we will try to get the distribution and the participation rates for it.
I appreciate you. One of the things that is a top priority for me for this upcoming session, and I've been working with many legislators on this issue over the summer, my community contributes over 14% to the funding formula, receives less than 4%. So I would like to meet with you, and I will be sending a request to meet with your office to speak about these issues. Second, over 10 years, there was an error in the funding formula as it related to the population counts for Marion County, because the law stipulates that the population count is based on the consolidation of fire districts. I had the pleasure of meeting with the state auditor when I was a city controller. We were promised that that correction will take place in 2019. Can you please confirm with your staff, if you don't have the answer today, if that error has been corrected as far as the population counts for Marion County?
Yeah, as you state, I'm not familiar with the issue, but we would be happy to follow up with you.
I appreciate you. And just to give you, I made that point on the Senate floor. Indianapolis was shortchanged north of $75 million over a period of 10 years because of that error. The third question, by 2029, NDOT has some debt that will roll over. The debt service payments currently are in the range of $90 to $100 million annually. Are there any plans to repurpose that debt for future projects at this point?
I mean, on debt specifically, we don't plan to incur any debt without strong partnership from the legislature and the governor. But certainly, any new revenues or revenues that would be the result of more minimalized debt payments, we would certainly invest back into the program. So.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. I'll be advocating for that, to not renew that debt once it expires and redirect those dollars in the formula for local distribution. My final two questions, Mr. CFO, do you know the distribution of dollars, whether the MVH or the LRS, Motor Vehicle Highway Fund, or local roads and streets under the funding formula, the percentage between the state versus local units, counties and cities, roughly speaking, based on dollar amount?
I'm sorry, are you asking for the percentage?
Yeah, how much out of, on each dollar or on total budget, how much the locals receive versus the state?
Right. Today, from the motor vehicle highway account, the locals receive 38% and NDOT 62%. Then from highway, road, and street, NDOT receives 63%, locals 37%.
I appreciate your competence, because these are the exact numbers that I received from LSA, so that tells me that you did your homework, so thank you for that. I will be advocating for slightly changing that to be more consistent to 60 versus 40, because the locals, when I looked at the data, how much they contribute to the funding formula, citizens across the state, while I'm very proud of your work, I'm very supportive of NDOT, very proud of what you do. We do rank #1 on state highways, but our local counties are struggling with their infrastructure, and residential roads are deteriorating. And it's being politicized that it's the failure of local cities rather than looking at the funding formula. My final question, I have been working with Senator Kreider, who championed the changes in, I think it was 2017, to raise the dime increase and 1 penny inflation adjustment. That law is going to sunset, or that increase is going to sunset, I think, in 2020, by the end of 2024. So I share his concern with the expedited adoption of electric vehicles. There's a strategic threat to funding and indeed infrastructure funding on two levels. First, the adoption of electric vehicles, and then second, the reliance, fully reliance on gasoline use tax and sales taxes. So even though the revenues might be going up because prices per gallon have been going up, but the consumption has been declining over the last maybe 10, 15 years. Any thoughts from NDOT on addressing this strategic threat to our funding of our infrastructure by suggesting any models that we should consider as a General Assembly?
I think we've already been having this discussion openly with legislators as we meet. Certainly, we understand that our role is not to presuppose a solution, but there are different options that we are open to studying. I think they're pretty well documented in the public, namely tolling and vehicle miles traveled, maybe a few other options that we could look at. Certainly, there are pros and cons to each approach, and we would be happy to educate anybody who's willing to listen as we kind of try to address the revenue threats that are upcoming in the next decade to decade and a half.
Absolutely. I look forward to working with you on this issue. My final question, the gasoline use tax. A few years ago, the General Assembly passed a law to move the gasoline use tax dollars that went into the general fund. I think this fiscal year, what is remaining is about 32% that has not yet transitioned to the general fund. What are the dollars? About $150 million is what equates to that 32%. What are those dedicated for currently? Are they dedicated, even though they go to the general fund, are they dedicated for state highway funds, or what are they used for?
Yeah, certainly I would say that our funding is a kind of a mixed portfolio of how we inject it into our paying for all of the things that we've just talked about doing, right? So certainly it's not like a one-for-one, we dedicate, gut goes to this, and et cetera, but certainly we amalgamate and forecast what we are going to get from each one of those revenues, and that is put against priorities that the agency has set from a preservation perspective and taking care of what we've got, and also other priorities that stakeholders, including some in the legislative body, with projects that I've already mentioned here today. So I can assure you that there is no shortage of demand in terms
Absolutely.
of uses. So.
But the 32% is currently committed to projects that NDOT is overseeing, correct?
Yeah, we forecast that, yes.
Excellent. Again, thank you for your service. I appreciate both of you and look forward to working with you. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Delaney?
Yeah, quick question, Mr. Smith, we discussed this. Has the state of Indiana expressed interest in the new federal rail program, the Corridor Solicitation and Funding Program?
Yeah, we're looking at all options and all modes of transportation with funding that's available through the new federal bill.
Did you send an expression of interest? That's a statutory term. Did you send an expression of interest to Washington on this issue?
I'm not aware that we did.
So how are we able to participate in the program if we didn't ask and express interest in it?
We're monitoring funding programs as they come about.
I understand you're monitoring. Are you applying, asking, informing Washington that you want in?
We are applying for every program that comes available that we have the ability to participate in.
Okay,
Yes.
because I want to encourage that. You've done a great job on this dual tracking up in the region or the northwest part of the state, but there's hundreds of millions of dollars available for Indiana for modernized passenger rail, and people around the state are very interested, so I hope you'll do that. Second question, totally unrelated to that. Do we have any fixed price contracts for this construction? You're talking about the inflation and costs. Do we operate under fixed price contracts or not with the building of these highways?
I'll let Joe talk about that.
Yeah, all of our construction contracts are fixed price, with the exception of a very few, and I can't give you the exact number now, but some of the contracts that involve hot mix asphalt pavement have an option where the contractors can actually opt in and track the asphalt index pricing, and then that's trued up at the end. We don't have very many of those. There are not many contractors that have opted in for that.
Is that restricted just to this asphalt, hot asphalt? Because you listed, steel, concrete. Are those things fixed price in the contracts? Or
Those are.
Those are, okay.
Yes, we follow federal highway bidding rules.
right.
We take the low bid price and it's fixed. Yes.
So the hit from those inflationary impacts will tend to come in the next contract rather than the last contract. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair to say.
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have three direct questions. On slide 16, you talked about 2035, there will be a downturn in regards to revenue going to NDOT. My question is that a realistic projected loss? Because I'm quite sure we'll be doing EVs, electric vehicles. We'll be taxing those by that time. And also, we'll be looking at taxing vehicles by the miles that they use here in the state of Indiana. So I know this is 2022, but I'm trying to project where I think you guys are looking at. When you start using numbers, 12, 13 years out. So I'm trying to have the crystal ball also to figure out what will we be trying to generate.
Right. Yeah, that's a very good question, actually. Yeah, each EV that is purchased new and replaces a motor, internal combustion engine no longer contributes to motor fuel taxation. The only revenue that vehicle or a hybrid then would contribute to the state as a whole would be the supplemental registration fees. And all of those fees go to community crossings. NDOT does not get any of those fees. That's why we're showing the revenue decrease due to electric vehicle adoption.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Ms. Commissioner, did you want to add something?
I would just say that it's absolutely accurate that this is a prognostication, if nothing's changed, what the situation will be. And that's why we're talking about it right now, because there will be probably some adjustments that need to be made over time.
By that time, I'll probably have somebody driving me around anyway. Okay. I won't have to worry about that. A while back, we used to have weigh stations and been working on trying to address that. We had a pilot project up in 8094. What happened to that? Is that still going on, or do you know about that? Because that's a loss of $70 to $80 million a
Yeah.
year to us.
Yeah, we've done nothing legislatively, as you know, but certainly we continue to monitor and prove the concept and collect data so that we can share exactly what we're seeing up there.
So are we getting any money? We're not getting anything?
Not
off
right
of-
now. No, we are not.
So we continue to give up that highway 8094 that's always backed up with truckers.
We continue to give it up. I'm sorry.
We don't have the weigh stations or anything up there. I mean, or anywhere in the state.
We've got weigh stations in the state, but
Are
certainly,
they operating?
to my knowledge, they are.
So what's the revenue source from the weigh stations?
I can't speak to that, sir. We would have to get back with you.
Okay, duly appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think, and then earlier in we talked about the underground storage tanks. Of the federal dollars, what do we get, all the federal taxes that we pay going back to underground storage tanks?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Earlier, we were talking to federal gas tax is a percentage that goes back to us as states for underground storage tanks. Do you know what that is and what we generate out of that?
I don't have that exact number, I can get it, but I know that of the 18.4 cents that we collect federal, and that goes to federal highway, and then it's redistributed to us through the Highway Trust Fund. We are, I believe, now a net recipient rather than a donor state.
Thank you. I got all choked up on that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Brown.
Mr. Chairman, getting back to the slide with the EVs and the community crossings, when you were talking about the distribution to community crossings, did it include the EV and hybrid fees?
It does?
It does?
Yeah.
So in other words, the ratio, the percentage, there was a discussion on whether or not some communities were getting their fair share in community crossings. I'm asking, do the locals, does that percent, the match, does it include electric and hybrid fees? Or is that just an add-on to what they get?
No, it's not. Community Crossing Fund receives funding from two sources, gasoline use tax
Right.
and then the registrations. All of that is distributed back to the locals, and we follow the legislative, the Indiana Code guidelines on what percent can go to local, what percent to large cities. Is that your question?
Not quite. So is the percent coming out of the gas tax, can it be decreased, if you will, because as we add in EV and hybrid fees, it offsets, or is it an add-on? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a area for policy debate. The amount of money that would be dedicated to the community crossing grows exponentially over time because of the adoption of hybrid and electric vehicles.
Yeah, I think that's my point. In other words, the state is not getting a share of those dollars. So we're splitting the sales tax gas money with locals, but the state is not getting a share. And to your point, as the EV hybrid fees increase, right now it's all dedicated to locals, to the
Yeah, I'm
community
following you
crossings.
now. That's absolutely accurate.
Okay, so we probably need to look at that and address that. And when you do the community crossings, is there any accountability on the locals' responsibility, or is it just they come up with X and we supply the X plus?
Yeah, I mean, as part of the law, they have to submit an asset management plan and have an active account of all of the roadways and infrastructure relative to roads in their city or town, municipality, and they have to submit that to the agency for review to make sure that they have an active plan ongoing. And then, obviously, we follow federal and state rules around ensuring that their projects are accomplishing the objective that we awarded. And if not, we need to address that. So specifically, we've had some issues directly with inflation, with bids coming back higher than what locals would have anticipated. This is a time where we should be probably addressing that, but in the normal course of business, locals are held accountable to doing the true scope of their project that they have applied for in the Community Crossings Award.
Well, with respect to looking at their asset management plan, the fact that they have one and necessarily followed through, but do you look at their revenue streams and determine, I mean, obviously, some really small communities don't have very many miles, but they also don't have necessarily the same resources. So do you look at a community's revenue streams and to see, do you have a sense and a formula, if you will, on how well they allocate them to their roads and streets? Since I'm sitting here in our state capitol, but I drive down 69, which is in constant need of repair and is constantly being updated, and there's a lot of need there, let alone in my own community in Northeast Indiana, which has a lot more wear and tear from trucks in winter driving. So when I hear that some communities think they're getting shortchanged, I wonder if we're looking at the fiscal accountability of that community to make sure that they're spending their dollars wisely and not spending it on other transportation projects that are not as successful. Do we look at a tire or just their asset management plan?
Yeah, we just look at the level of the asset management plan. We don't get into the financial management for that local.
For their entire transportation?
Right.
That might be something to consider too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you. No question. Mr. Chairman, if it would be possible, I would like to ask if the commissioner will submit to your office or whomever revenues from the waste stations that we have in the state of Indiana. And also, I don't think Mr. Joe understood that, how much of the federal dollars that we get from our taxes go into underground storage tanks from the federal taxes. So I'd like to know how much money we get for that to take care of underground storage tanks. Those are my two requests, Mr. Chairman, please.
We'd be happy to follow up.
Yeah, what we'd have you do is send it through the budget agency, and then they'll distribute it to all of us.
Okay.
So thank you. Anyone else? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Department of Natural Resources, and we have Dan Bortner and Kirsten Haney. Did you bring somebody from every state park? Yeah. Big budget, a lot of people.
Just a big family.
Ready to roll? All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Mishler and members of the committee. My name is Dan Bortner, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director of the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. I've been with the agency for almost 18 years, the first 15 of which were spent as the Indiana State Parks Director. First, let me say thank you for giving us the opportunity to present to you today some information which we hope will be beneficial as you begin your work setting the state's financial priorities for the next biennium. With me today are key members of the DNR leadership team, and I'd like to introduce those to you before we begin. I have Ryan Miller, who's the Deputy Director and the head of the Regulatory Bureau. We have Chris Smith, who's the Deputy Director and head of the Landholding Bureau. Kirsten Haney, our CFO, Deputy Director and head of the Administrative Bureau. We have Lieutenant Colonel Jason Lee from the Division of Law Enforcement. Jeff Saucerman, who is the head of the Finance Division. Greg Sorrells, who's the head of the Asset Management Division. And Caitlin Smith, who is our Legislative Liaison. Next slide. Okay. Next, I'd like to walk you through how the agency is set up. We operate under the banner of 3 main bureaus, and we house 19 divisions. The Landholding Bureau is led by Chris Smith, as I had mentioned, and is made up of the following divisions: State Parks, State Forests, the Fish and Wildlife Division, Nature Preserves, Land Acquisition, and Communications. The Regulatory Bureau is led by Ryan Miller and is made up of these divisions: Division of Water, Historic Preservation, Entomology, and Reclamation. And the third bureau, which is led by Kirsten Haney, is made up of the divisions of Accounting, Engineering, Finance, Asset Management, Human Resources, and MIS. The standalone divisions consist of Law Enforcement, the Legal Division, Hearings and Natural Resources Commission, and just to mention the Natural Resources Foundation, it is an entity that operates with an independent board of directors for the benefit of the agency. Next slide. Now I would like to talk to you about our guiding principles. We refer to these principles as the 7 pillars, and they are the guidebook for success as we move the agency forward. The first pillar is customer service. This is our highest priority, the servicing of Hoosiers and our guests. If we don't get this part right, the other pillars don't really matter. The customer service function is, like I said, the highest priority that we have. The second pillar is fiscal responsibility. We must be accountable for every dollar that comes in or goes out of the organization. Third pillar is communication, and that is both internal and external. We are a very large organization spread out all over the state, so we have to make sure that we're talking to each other, and of course communication with the public as a whole. The fourth pillar, succession planning and diversity. We must provide a plan for the advancement of the next generation of leaders within the agency, and we must ensure that all Hoosiers see opportunity in careers with the Department of Natural Resources. Fifth pillar is personal growth. We will provide a pathway to career success for those people who are willing to come on board and serve Hoosiers in the manner that we have to be able to do that. Sixth pillar is flattening the organization. We want to bring decision-making as close to the people that we serve as is possible. And the final pillar is enhancing the DNR brand. We will do everything within our power to establish a brand that is associated with excellence in customer service and quality experiences. These pillars serve as the foundation of our fiscal year 24-25 budget request. Next slide. Next, I would like to share with you some information regarding our recreational revenue. As you can see from these bar graphs, revenue was continuing to climb even as we entered into the pandemic. However, once the economy started coming back up, we saw a huge spike in Hoosiers getting outside. Now, we saw the same thing right after 9/11. When people are seeking normalcy in their lives, they go outside. So this was nothing new to us. And it wasn't just unique to the Hoosier state. We saw the same thing in national parks and state park systems across the country, and even local and municipal parks. As expected, though, we are now seeing a leveling off of recreation-based revenue. Now, it's leveling off at a much higher rate than it was pre-pandemic, but it's leveling out rather than increasing. If you look at those figures, fiscal year 19, 56.6, and then in 20, we were up to 61, and then it jumped to 79 right after people started getting back outside, and it's now dropped back down to 72. So if you compare fiscal year 22 with fiscal years 19 and 20 pre-pandemic, even though we're leveling off at a higher level. If you look at year-to-date figures, fiscal year 22 year-to-date was 28.1, and fiscal year 23 year-to-date is 32.6. Now, a lot of that increase in the year-to-date figures has to do with some increases we made in the fish and wildlife fees. So there is that. That's about $5.1 million of that. Next slide. Now I'd like to pivot and talk about some of our accomplishments achieved during the current biennium. There we go. Next slide. First topic I'd like to mention is the Governor's Next Levels Trails program. If you recall, our goal was to make connectors to existing trail systems and to someday have access to a trail within minutes of every Hoosier. So let's take a look at the progress thus far. As you can see, we've gone through 3 rounds of grants for the program. In the first round, we awarded $25 million. In the second round, we awarded another $30 million. And in the most recent round, we awarded another $65 million. We are working on getting those projects all under contract as we speak. Let's go to the next slide. Now let's look at what that means in terms of miles added for recreational use. We've completed 50 miles of new trail to date, with another 48.56 miles currently under construction and another 91.54 miles in the planning stage. That brings the total number of awarded miles to 190.1 miles that will be added across the Hoosier State. Slide. Next, I would like to go over the governor's Million Tree Initiative. The goal of this initiative was to plant 1 million new trees across the Hoosier landscape between 2020 and 2025. So let's take a look at the progress so far on that. In the first 2 years of the project, we were able to get 220,000 trees in the ground the first year and another 197,400 in the second year. We just finished our final planning for 2022, and I brought our total to 250,000 more trees planted this year. We've partnered with several organizations who helped us along the way with the physical planting of the trees, and you can see those organizations listed there to the right. We do so appreciate their passion for the work that we are doing. Next slide. Now let's turn our attention to the deferred maintenance program. The funding provided for this program has made a huge difference in our ability to deal with some of the most pressing maintenance issues that we have. The deferred maintenance program has been a wonderful partnership with the team at the Department of Administration. We appreciate so much the help that has been afforded us by the Commissioner Howard and her team, and we are making great progress in getting things done. So far, we've completed 101 projects across the state, and we have several more in the works. We requested the funding in 3 rounds. In round 1, we used $29.6 million. In round 2, we used $52.2 million. And in the most recent round, we utilized $18.1 million. Next slide. Next, let's discuss the Governor's Next Level Conservation Trust. This program was modeled after the very successful President Benjamin Harrison Conservation Trust and its predecessor, the Indiana Heritage Trust. A substantial part of the funding for the Harrison Trust and the Indiana Heritage Trust has come from the sale of the Indiana Environmental License Plate. By fiscal year 22, roughly 1.6 million of these plates have been sold since the beginning in 1992, representing $41.3 million. Next slide. The funding for the Next Level Conservation Trust comes from the American Rescue Plan funds. There were $25 million allocated for this program to help us conserve and protect important conservation, recreation, and historic areas all across the state. All the property acquired through this program will become part of the public trust for future generations of Hoosiers to enjoy. The 3-to-1 match helped many local partners be a part of this historic program, and the minimum project size of $100,000 helped as well. Slide. From a project standpoint, the Next Level Conservation Trust is off to a fantastic start. We had 27 applications from 17 different applicants across the state. Those were approved in the, 27 applications from 17 applicants across the state were approved in the first round of project applications on September 6th of this year. These 27 projects protected 3,718 acres of landscape for Hoosiers to enjoy now and in the future. The total funding approved in this first round was $22,861,000. The remaining balance will go towards a second round of awards, which will be made in January of 2023. So we went through $22 million in about 30 days. The need is huge, and the ability to come in with the 3-to-1 match brought a lot of interest to the program. So next slide. The final topic I'd like to touch base on before I turn it over to Kirsten is our law enforcement division. In 2022, we graduated 40 new conservation officers from our recruit school. These new officers will be instrumental in fulfilling our needs with regard to fish and wildlife regulation enforcement, state property and waterway patrols, outdoor education, projects which require scuba expertise, our canine program, and our search and rescue efforts. And now I would like to turn it over to Kirsten Haney, our CFO, to go over our budget request and our change packages. Kirsten.
Thanks, Director Bortner, and thanks for allowing us the opportunity just to meet with you all and discuss our biennium budget requests. So we are requesting an overall 25% increase to our dedicated appropriation based on our existing base, and then 21% to our general fund. This is roughly $9.8 million in general fund increase, and then roughly $19 million to our existing dedicated funds. On this next slide, I'll walk you through what that actually looks like and how those appropriations will be utilized. So for our dedicated funds, we're requesting an increase to parks to support roughly $3.3 million in the salary increases as a result of the compensation study that you heard about yesterday. We're also requesting another $5 million of operational cost increases, just the increases that we've seen from the prior biennium. For Fish and Wildlife, we're requesting $2.7 million increase towards the salary increases. $3 million would be utilized for state match towards the federal funds. And then $1.4 million would be used for operational cost increases. And then lastly, for our law enforcement, we are requesting an increase of a dedicated fund appropriation towards the purchase of body cams and tasers for our law enforcement officers. The year one cost is slightly higher, so it's about $827,000, and then year two, that ongoing cost is $584,000. For our general funds, we were requesting roughly $4.4 million towards the salary increases for the compensation study. And then the remaining $5.4 million would be used for operational increases for our various general funds, increased funding for the Harrison Trust for land acquisition and conservation, as Director Bortner just talked about, and then other operational cost increases that we've also been seeing over the biennium. And then with that, we are happy to take any questions and go through anything that you guys would like.
Yeah, so that last one there about the raise for the officers. So state police have talked to us and told us it's very difficult to, retain officers, find, applicants, things like that. So are you having the same issue?
When we go out and open up a new recruit class, we generally have a large number of people who apply to that. It's not uncommon for us to start out with 600 pieces of paper, and we'll end up with 30 or less at the school. It's a pretty difficult process for folks to get through. But we had two recruit schools this year, and Lieutenant Colonel, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we had, 27 or 28 in the first school and 15 in the second?
So we had 25 from, go ahead.
25 and 15?
Up or down, or, is that?
It's
Are
keeping
you
us.
fulfilling all the necessary, the number of officers that you need?
It's a struggle because we're going through a lot of retirements right now, so we're breaking even is what we're doing for the most part. But to answer the question as far as being able to attract qualified applicants, we haven't seen that difficulty.
Questions? Senator Brown.
Question with respect to the trails. They're very popular. I know there's a match, but once the community, these are not state park
Right.
trails. These are local trails. that
Right,
you're
all
doing.
of the next level trails funding was outside of DNR.
Right, so for that, you're just a pass-through then? You don't have any responsibility? Okay, does anybody have any responsibility? My concern locally is, do they have an obligation to maintain these? Because sometimes I'm wondering if the communities who receive these are actually aware of the cost.
Sure.
The ability
Sure.
to do that, but that's not something you have anything to do with.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Chris, is there any kind of an auditing process or anything once the thing is built, do you know of?
So, yes, good afternoon, Chris Smith, Deputy Director, DNR. So most often it is either a local community or it is a nonprofit set up solely to operate the trail system. On those nonprofits, they are doing fundraising mechanisms for operations and maintenance. They oftentimes do have to go after other grants to make some of that work, but the department is not funding ongoing maintenance throughout the year. It is purely acquisition of property and then construction of the trail itself.
Right, but I knew that, but then the locals who have no obligation to maintain or
Yeah.
show a plan. Back in the day locally, I had asked our people if they had an anticipation of what it would cost, and they couldn't tell me what it would cost to maintain a mile of trail, for example. So
We can certainly
you
check.
kind of want these dollars to be successful long-term, right?
Certainly,
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Daniel, one quick question. Of your tree plantings that you have, and appreciate DNR that allow us to give away samplings as legislators. Are those numbers in here also, or are those additional numbers?
Those are additional numbers. If we were counting every tree that we had a good hunch that was getting planted, we would have blown this out of the water a long time ago.
Okay.
We want to we want to be absolutely certain that we've got 1 million of them in the ground, so we're only counting those ones that we're putting in for that program.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to make it.
How many acres is that, sir?
Ah, golly.
We average about 1,000 trees per acre.
1,000 trees per acre? Thank you.
Any other
If we
questions?
can keep the deer away from them.
Anyone else? All right, thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Next, we have IDEM and Brian Ruckensus.
Liza. All set? Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Mishler and members of the committee. My name is Brian Rockensus. I'm the Commissioner of IDEM. Been in this role, well, in 5 days, it will be a year. So I'm relatively new to the Commissioner role, but I've been with the agency for about 9 years in various capacities. Here with me today is Hillary Alderet. She's my CFO. And then I have my Chief of Staff, my Controller, and my Ledge Director behind me as well. So our mission is to implement federal and state regulations to protect human health and the environment while allowing environmentally sound operations of industrial, agricultural, commercial, and government activities vital to a prosperous economy. We do this through permitting, compliance, and sometimes enforcement, as well as some other grant and education opportunities. So our agency structure is divided into 6 major offices: Office of Air Quality, Office of Land Quality, Office of Water Quality. Those 3 are very similar in their core activities. They do permitting, compliance, and enforcement. And then each of them have something special about them. So in air, we measure the air. Water, we test the water through electrifying fish and collecting fish tissue and insect tissue. And in land, we deal with contamination issues, gas stations or other things that have contamination in the ground. Program support is our office that deals with pollution prevention, recycling programs, education, outreach activities, and then the Office of Chief of Staff is a catch-all, government affairs, finance, ag, HR, communications, and legal counsel does what you would think it'd do. We have 4 regional offices: Valpo, South Bend, Petersburg, and Brownstown, and we have a lab out on Shadeland Ave. Our staffing, and I'm sure you've heard from many agencies on staffing, we've had issues maintaining folks. 2015, we had about 840, and at our low point in 2021, we were about 740. We're up to 768 right now. We're budgeted for 802, and one of the things we have seen is with the governor's compensation study, the populations of folks going to our jobs has skyrocketed, which is great. So we're getting great applicants coming in the door. And I'm going to turn it over to Hillary.
Here is an overview of our appropriations by source. As you can see, we are primarily funded through dedicated funds, 59% of our agency's appropriations through fees and permits. Another 28% comes from the general fund. This is applicable to anything that touches the entire agency, such as the administration and Office of Program Support. And last but not least is our federal funds. We receive a majority of our federal funds from the EPA, and that comes in with 13% for a total budget of $143.7 million. We have several change packages we're asking for 24 and 25. Our first one is our performance partnership support. This addresses a historical deficit due to increased costs and increased match requirements. Our second change package, we're asking for 15 additional drinking water staff due to an EPA report that suggested we needed to evaluate our staffing loads They suggested a higher amount, and internally we evaluated and came up with 15 additional staff. The third one is IoT charges, which I'm sure has been spoken to throughout the presentations as a result of increased costs. And last but not least is our general salary adjustment and the SBD salary compensation study for a total of a 13.7% increase.
So for agency successes over the last couple of years, one, and this is the first one, environmental justice, is a success and also an opportunity. The success is we've been able to hire some staff to help with environmental justice communities. We have one individual that's located in Northwest Indiana and one individual located here in Indianapolis. And their sole job is to help with communication and outreach to community groups so that they can be part of any process that we do that's a public process. One of the complaints has always been that they're kept out of decision-making that we do. So hiring those folks goes a long way to addressing that. The opportunity in environmental justice is what should the focus be? A lot of EPA's focus has been on permitting. How can we make permits more stringent, or how can we get people to move out of different communities? You know, I don't have any laws or rules that tell me I can do things that way. If somebody meets the criteria of a permit, I have to issue that permit. And so my focus with environmental justice has been more about how do we deal with the contamination, the legacy issues that have existed for years and years, and how can we help that community move forward? Another success is the firefighting foam initiative that was the governor's agenda item last year, and it was a collaboration between Department of Homeland Security and IDEM. Between the two agencies, we paid for the collection of about 30,000 gallons of PFAS foam from fire stations, and it was free. The pickup and disposal of it is free to the fire stations. And then now they don't have the risk of PFAS moving forward. Great government service, this is our metrics. This is what we're judged on. The average number of days to issue inspection reports, so from the day we show up at your facility to the day we issue a report, statutorily is 45 days. That's a long time for an industry not to know if they have an issue or not. We put a goal in for 7 days, and we're currently averaging 3.9 days. So we're doing a really good job of meeting that metric. Permits, as I discussed earlier, are our number one metric. And that measurement is how quickly can we get those permits done. And then another internal metric is how challenged are those permits? Are they effective permits? Or are they being litigated and we lose in court? So from the efficiency standpoint, our goal is 70% of the time allowed. So if we have 100 days, we want to get it done in 70. We are currently on average getting permits done in about 51% of the time allowed. And then our other two metrics that we report on are excellent drinking water, excellent clean air. The drinking water metric is based on utilities that meet all the standards. So if a large utility has a large violation, that number will go down. Thankfully, this number has hovered around 99% for almost a decade. So the utilities are doing a good job maintaining the drinking water. And clean air, it's similar. How many areas of the state are in attainment? We have 8 townships in Lake and Porter County that are not meeting attainment, but it's mainly because they're part of the greater Chicago area. The EPA sets metropolitan areas based on major cities rather than state boundaries. Reducing sewage to our streams. This is our combined sewer overflow program. This is probably the number one program that we have that has the most dramatic reduction of pollution in waterways. So we have 107 communities that are implementing plans. Some are in coordination with the federal government, some are just state plans. We have cut untreated sewage by 45% already, and there's been about a $2 billion investment in water infrastructure in the state from the state revolving fund, and 459, because of that fund, we've saved the state about $459 million. I mentioned air designations already. Promoting economic development, it is my goal to get sites, contaminated sites off our program rolls quickly. And to date, the last 5 years, we've had about 2,400 sites go from contaminated status where they can't be used to now a status in which they can be redeveloped and reused. Challenges, recruitment, retention. Not only are we having better candidates applying, but we have also been working with universities to provide or produce curriculum so that we have a better pipeline from universities to the agency with students that are interested in environmental work. So we've been meeting with IU Bloomington and IUPY, and we're going to be reaching out to IU Northwest or North pretty soon to develop those pipelines. A major challenge we're having right now is our declining Title V fee revenues. The Title V program is our Clean Air Act program. Title V is the part of the federal code that refers to the Clean Air Act. In that part of the code, it says that the air programs in each state can only be funded through permit fees. We can't have general fund and we can't use federal dollars to fund that program. And we raised fees in that program in 2019. It was about a 27% increase, which netted us about $2.1 million. By 2020, end of 2020, early 2021, we lost that $2 million. Because as emissions go down, our revenue goes down. Which in the 70s, when this was thought up, I believe EPA never thought we would be at the point where we have such a reduction in emissions. The emission reduction came from the power plant industry, where they're shifting from coal to natural gas or other renewable resources. So this is our legislative agenda for this year, is to address that. Statutorily, the fee increase would not be in the statute. The fee increase would happen at the board, at our Environmental Rules Board. Another challenge we're dealing with is aging technology, infrastructure. We have a lot of legacy systems that we need to upgrade. They're not supported anymore. In an effort to provide better access to the public and help us get our work done faster, we need to upgrade those things. And then priorities moving forward. I mentioned contaminated sites a little bit ago. Right now, if you are in our state cleanup program or our voluntary remediation program, from the time you walk in the door to the time you're done is almost 15 years. It's a long time. That's a lot of work for my staff. It's a lot of time in which these communities don't have these properties to redevelop and reuse. And it's a lot of time for these properties not to be on the public tax, back on the tax rolls. So just by doing some simple process improvement internally, we are able to shave that by almost half. One program was shaved down to 5 years. So we're going to start rolling that out to the community of attorneys and consultants that deal with contaminated sites, get their input, and then we're going to move forward. PFAS regulation. PFAS is a chemical used in anything that is water wicking or fire retardant, and it has a lot of benefit in those aspects, but it causes a lot of environmental harm. So along with the thing we did with Homeland Security, we've also been sampling all the public water systems to make sure that it is not in the water that people are drinking. And then we're trying to follow as best we can EPA's rules as they're developing standards for drinking water. And they will be developing standards likely making PFAS a hazardous waste, which has a whole list of other implications. And then another priority challenge moving forward is EPA is likely going to tighten air regs. So there's 5 criteria pollutants. 2 of them, one is ozone, the other is particulate matter 2.5. The 2.5 is the measurement of the molecule. They're looking at dropping those, lowering those standards. For PM 2.5, if they did that, it would work completely in attainment in the state. 10 counties would immediately be out of attainment. For ozone, we have those 8 townships in Lake and Porter. As soon as, if they lower that, we would have almost 20 counties in the state be non-attainment. So what does that mean? That means permit restrictions get harder. You have more things that you have to put in your permit, you have more controls that you need in your permit in order to get your permit. It's costly for the industries that need permits, and it breaks consistency that everybody's been used to for a while. And that is our report.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, I'm going to go back to something that came up with the IFA, the underground storage tanks. I don't know if you were watching back then or not, but, so 3 questions. What is the balance of the fund right now?
We ended fiscal '22 with, I believe it was 148 million in the underground storage tank.
And then how much goes in every year?
We receive about 40 to 45 million in revenue.
And how much approximately, I know it changes every year, but on the average, how much goes out of the fund every year?
So we are capped at 11% for administrative personnel costs. It depends on the claims that are submitted each year. Last year, we received about 18 million in claims. Some years it's been closer to 30 million. It can fluctuate just based on the number of claims we receive, but that's the primary driver of expenses in that fund.
So over and above, let's say you got 30 million in claims. So over and above the claims, you can take 11% of the balance or
No.
11% of the annual fee?
11% of the revenue from the preceding year.
From the preceding year.
Okay, so 40 million went into the fund, you can take 11% of that for administrative fees?
Yep.
Okay, so the 30 million is on top of that. So like if you put out 30 million for expenses plus the 11% of your internal expenses?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Senator Brown.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the moving faster in your permitting process. But with respect to wetland permitting in particular, have you received an increase in the number of permits? And how many of those permits have been, or denials thereof, have been appealed?
On wetlands, we actually have it here. So since SCA 389 became effective, 230.5 acres have been impacted of wetlands. Only 40 acres required mitigation. We don't deny the ability to impact a wetland. What we do is, depending on what kind of wetland it is, require a certain level of mitigation. So you have to restore it or you have to pay for it to be restored. So from the July, when that bill was passed, to now, only 17% of wetlands that have been impacted actually had to have any kind of mitigation.
17%, what does that come out to in terms of acreage? And is it the same?
40 acres.
40 acres, and is it the same process for all of them? I mean, how many permits are we talking about?
Quite a lot.
40 acres was quite a lot of permits?
No, over that period of time, there's a lot of permits. You can have half an acre be a permit. You can have 40 acres be a permit. So I can't give you the definite number of permits. We can get that for you. But there's also 2 levels, right? There's the federal level, which the Army Corps is involved in. I bet a lot of that is that 40 acres.
Okay, I was just asking about the ones that are not overseen by the feds. I'm sorry. I was just talking about the ones.
We can get that drilled down for you.
And then I would like to see of those, what the remediation was required, if any, and also those, how many of those permits then were appealed?
Okay. I don't believe any were appealed.
Okay.
But we'll check on that.
Okay, good, thank you. And then with respect to, I didn't understand what you were saying when you were talking about Lake and Porter County, and there, was it air quality or water quality?
Air.
Air
Ozone.
quality. So they are under Chicago rules, if you will?
So the way EPA designates an area is based on the metropolitan area near them. Another example is Clark and Floyd County are tied to Louisville. On the eastern part of the state, they're tied to Cincinnati.
So I'm going to guess if you're closer to Chicago, is the air quality less or better than what the neighboring county would be if it weren't tied to Chicago?
So the further east you go from Chicago, the better the air would be.
Okay, so they get a less air quality standard.
Right.
So does that county have the ability to appeal that or ask for more money outside of that, so to speak? No.
So.
And are they
so-
aware of that, the
Yeah.
county commissioners? So, okay, so
Yeah,
they
yeah.
could take matters into their own hands. Well, they could, in a sense, improve it themselves, right?
So the monitor that makes that area non-attainment is actually in Wisconsin. So it doesn't matter actually what we do in Indiana. We're never going to get out of that situation until Wisconsin figures out their issue.
I see. And then finally, when you were talking about the universities that you're working with, it is interesting, you talked about universities down here, and yet Northeast Indiana has the most lakes, I'm not mistaken, and wetlands, and yet you don't seem to be partnering with the universities in my neck of the woods. Why not?
We just looked at, I'm a recent, well, a couple of years ago, master's student at IU. So, and IUPUI is right here. And I was on a call with a group out of IU that deals with sustainability, and we brought it up. And so we met with them. We're going to be reaching out to every university that we can to develop those relationships. It's not that we're not, we just started this process.
Okay, I mean, that would really be helpful. We
Yeah.
have Trine, we have Indiana Tech, we have, in particular, PFW, they all have engineering programs. They're
Yep.
all going to be more than willing to talk to you. And then those graduates, obviously, many first gen, they come from our community, they'd prefer to stay there, and they would probably be very interested in those programs as opposed to other places in the state.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
You said 200 and some acres were affected by that bill. What do you mean affected? How are they affected?
I'm sorry. I
Like,
didn't hear
define
that.
affected. When you were talking about the Senate bill, like how many acres were affected? You said 200 and some acres of wetlands were affected.
So we.
So what do you mean affected? What does that mean?
230 acres of wetlands came in for permitting.
Okay.
So there's 230 acres of wetland that we allowed impacts to, meaning whether it was industry or builders or farmers, they were allowed to go and do whatever they needed to do to that wetland. That's what it means by affected.
But you still had to grant a permit to do that.
Not all of them, no.
Okay.
So based on that bill, all Class 1 wetlands no longer need a permit. So there's a lot of impacts to wetlands that happen now that we don't even know about because they're Class 1s. And they work with their consultant to make sure that they're in good standing. We've been developing really good relationships with the consultants in the wetland world, and we're meeting semi-annually to make sure we're all on the same page, because while there was the Senate Bill 389, 2 months after that, a court decision nationally occurred, which threw a lot of what 389 did out the window. So there's a lot of this upheaval, and we're trying to be as consistent as possible so to help the consultants. So we're bringing them in and working with them pretty closely.
Questions?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Cadora?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, thank you for your presentation, for your team. What is the current air quality index for Indiana and the water quality metric as far as our ranking on a national level?
So it depends on what you're comparing to. A lot of articles that you would read would say we have the worst air quality, worst water quality in the state. Well, if you're comparing TRI data, which is the toxic relief inventory data, you would see that more toxics or more pollutants go out in Indiana than other states. That does not mean they're not treated. So a lot of times it's unfair representations of what our state cleanliness is compared to other states. We're one of the largest industrial states in the country. So you're not going to get the pollutant loads that you may get here in Montana. That does not mean our water's not clean. And so a number of months ago, I wrote an op-ed in response to an article that was posted because the article that was posted led the state to believe that a lot of our water issues was due to agriculture. Well, it's not true. And then you compare our state to other states. Well, what you don't know is that when we do water testing, we hold it to the most stringent testing possible. so that you can recreate in it. Most other states hold it to an industrial level, which is a lot higher. So their report looks like it's not as bad as what it really is.
Does IDEM have your own ranking by which you can compare us in a more fair way that is comparing apples to apples? I'm just trying to get at the factual assessment of the quality of water and air in Indiana.
It's hard to get that data because of how different the different states report things. There's no standard way of reporting, you know, is our air worse than other states? Do we have more pollutants going there? Yeah, we have more industry too. But that doesn't mean that we're dirtier than anybody else.
I appreciate the response. I tend to appreciate data-driven analysis of things. And my concern with this is that if IDEM doesn't have an internal criteria to compare us to the nation, and if we're just refuting what the rest of the nation is saying about our quality of water and air, as legislators, we're left to be in a place by which we're looking at budgets, and I believe budgets reflect values of any organization. So if the budget does not, if you come to us and say, I want to improve the quality of water and air, how can I, as a legislator, measure how much you need if I can't find a very reputable, reliant metrics that I can use to say, our goal over the next decade to move up ranking by 5 positions or 10 positions, or what data should we be looking at?
So we measure all of our air, and we actually have one of the largest air monitoring networks in the country. And that's why we're able to report that 97% of our state has air that meets the standards. That is what we're able to look at. What are the standards for the 5 criteria pollutants, and how well do we meet those? Now, you can judge whether or not that there should be some amount of better air above that, but we measure towards the standard, and we do a good job of that. We can provide you the data that we have specifically on air. We can also provide you the miles of streams. We measure more miles of streams for contaminants than almost every other state in the country. We can provide you that data as well.
No, I appreciate you. I'm not an ideologue who's interested in seeing an state agency fail. That is not public service. I want you to see you successful.
Absolutely.
And because your success is going to help citizens across the state. So my questions are more in line of, I can't help as a legislator but look at national data reports by some organizations that rank us as the worst, the 5th worst in the nation. So that's why I appreciate to look at the data. There are health consequences to those rankings, and I appreciate your team working on those issues. And I would, you know, you referenced it in one of your points earlier about the reduction in emissions, which could potentially lead to more stringent, or we might be placed on an improvement plan by the feds. So there are some metrics and some data that I think you're looking at that indicate that we need to continue to improve. I hope that next time we meet that there can be a clear articulation of where we are, where we need to be at, and what is that fiscal impact. And the fiscal impact include the analysis of, there are sometimes we don't include in the fiscal impact other factors such as the health cost to our state or lost productivity and all of these things. I appreciate you. I root for your success. I'm just asking for a little bit more data to help us understand where we are. Thank you.
Senator.
Representative Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner. One quick question. How many contract employees versus state employees do you now have on your staff?
All of our contract employees, if we have any, are in our IoT office.
About how many are those?
Maybe 4 or 5
Okay,
total. Yeah, we don't have many contract employees at all.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right.
Thank you.
Next, we have Department of Revenue.
You ready? Am I controlling this? Am I making this happen? Okay. Let's get started. Do what? Yes, we're from the Department of Revenue and we're here to help you. That's right. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Mishler and committee members. We are really thrilled to be here. We appreciate it. My name is Bob Grennis. I have been on Team Indiana since 2017, joining the Department of Revenue, originally as Chief Operating Officer and then last 3 years as the Commissioner. With me today is Ed Vance, who joined with me back in January of 17, and Ed has been a wonderful team member, our CFO, for those 6 years. Can't believe it's coming up on 6 years. We look forward to providing you a very brief agency update, and then we'll talk about our biennium request. But before I get started, I did want to share just how much we appreciate the open, transparent, and collaborative partnership that we have with many of the folks that are in this room, including our friends with OMB. Chris Johnston joined us. Chris was back here. He joined us. Zach and the SBA team, and Krista and Ben. We appreciate you guys very much. As you guys know, this is a very complex world we live in, and we could not do it without the wonderful help with all of these amazing team members. Okay, real quickly, okay, I got to remember to do this. Oh, this is us. Now, real quickly, Department of Revenue is comprised of about 700 dedicated public servants in 13 locations around the great state. Our mission is to serve Indiana by administering Indiana's tax laws in a fair, secure, and efficient manner. And our highly specialized team of professionals do just that for 65 different tax types, licenses, fees, permits, and penalties that go with our 65 Indiana tax types. At our very core, the Department of Revenue is a service agency, and we proudly serve millions of individuals, businesses, corporations, partners, and all of the organizations that are part of Indiana's tax system. Annually, we process millions of tax returns and payments, hundreds of thousands of pieces of correspondence. We serve customers across the state via phone, correspondence, secure messages, and walk-in service. We complete thousands of diverse audits. We address all taxpayer protests. We handle the tax policy and legal responsibilities of the agencies, and we manage all of our systems and operations. That's a lot in a short period of time. We publish an annual report by statute by October 1st of every year. They're on our website. Lots of great information, including lots of statistics. I did want to just make sure you understand that we are always here to help. We love to provide briefings, agency overviews. We also like when people come to visit us. Anytime you get a chance to tour our team and see the wonderful Hoosiers that are doing the work that they do, we very much appreciate doing that. Okay, real quickly, current biennium highlights. During the last 2 years, the DOOR team stepped up to every challenge presented to take care of our responsibilities and provide high-level services to all of our customers and stakeholders. We also kept a couple of really high-end projects on target, including Project Next Door, which I'll mention here in just a second. They were all on schedule. We are passionately committed to our mission. We lean on our award-winning culture, and we live our core values to do what we do every day to serve Indiana. Okay, high-level accomplishments. We did administer Indiana's 65 tax types over the last biennium. In FY21, we processed over $24 billion in tax revenue, and in FY22, over $27 billion. We had a couple of challenging tax seasons during this biennium. The 2020 individual tax season was extended, modified, and pandemic impacted. We completed that. We completed just recently the 21 tax season in calendar year 2022, and believe it or not, we are getting ready to kick off the next tax season, which starts in January. During this time, we effectively operated our cybersecurity, our ID protection, and refund fraud prevention programs. We stopped $11 million of attempted refund fraud in FY21 and over $9 million in FY22. During the biennium, we implemented a number of audit and compliance enhancements, including net operating loss, large dollar refund, and transfer pricing capabilities. We also advanced our key internal control and internal audit capabilities. We successfully implemented all business taxes In our new Indiana tax system, which I'll speak again in a second, Project Nextdoor, we did that in 2020. In 2021, we converted all individual taxes, fraud prevention, and ID protection. And here in 22, we implemented the final special taxes. We maintained our commitment to providing industry-leading service to Indiana's trucking industry through our Motor Carrier Services Division with our partnership with INDOT, ISP CVED, and BMV. Also with partnership with INDOT and ISP, we implemented a state-of-the-art oversized overweight permitting system and modernized our Motor Carrier Services registration system. A couple of proud things about our team. We were recognized by both Indiana and the USA Top Workplace programs as a top workplace in 2021 and 22. That makes 6 culture, organizational health, and employee engagement awards our team has won in 4 years. We were also recognized by our industry association, the Federation of Tax Administrators, with awards recognizing our employee communication, engagement, training, and skill development programs. And through tremendous collaboration this last year with all of Team Indiana, including the General Assembly, Governor Holcomb's team, the auditor, treasurer, and OMB staff, we successfully planned, designed, and completed not 1, but 2 rounds of automatic tax refunds, returning $325 to over 4.3 million Hoosiers. Okay, before I turn it over to Ed, I just want to say something about Project Nextdoor. In your packet, we included the section of our annual report that gave a report on the completion of Project Nextdoor. 2022 marked the conclusion of this 6-year modernization project. This project started in 2017, and it set aggressive goals to modernize Door's 20-plus-year-old technology and numerous standalone systems, close internal control gaps, improve internal efficiencies, enhance payment services and revenue processing, and improve customer service. And through the unwavering focus, commitment, and steadfast support from so many people, this project hit every deliverable, every milestone, was on schedule and on budget for 5 straight years, even during the pandemic. Project Nextdoor was a tremendous success for Door, Indiana taxpayers, the tax practitioner community, and every organization and individual who is involved in Indiana's tax administration world, and we could not have done it without lots of people's help. Modernization never ends, but we concluded the formal project in July of 2022. We're now focused on finding ways to utilize the enhanced data, improved functionality, and increased organizational capability that was developed during the project so that we can continue taking Door's service to the next level. We conclude this project with extreme pride and gratitude, and we are absolutely confident that we've established a strong foundation of success for many years to come. So the last 2 years have been tremendously challenging, rewarding, and successful. We are confident today that we are stronger and we're more committed than ever to Door's mission, vision, and purpose. We're proud of our accomplishments, and we're very proud to be part of Team Indiana. We're excited about finding new ways to work with our partners to enhance our services to the Hoosiers that count on us. The Indiana Department of Revenue is a very special place, and it's pretty neat to tell our story. So I'm going to turn that over to Ed, and he's going to give you a brief update on our biennium.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good afternoon, Chairman Mishler and members of the committee. Again, my name is Ed Vance, and I'm going to give you an overview on our budget request. So just looking at our schedule here, our biennium base is $80.2 million, and that's spread across our 3 main operating funds, which consist of 2 general funds and 1 dedicated fund, the dedicated fund for our Motor Carrier Services Division. Looking at the biennium years 2024 and 25, you'll notice an increase of $15.3 million. You can see the detail of the 6 change packages below. 12.1 million of that increase is due to statewide general increases in salaries and interagency charges. And those expenses are reflected in the first 3 change packages. So the remaining $3.2 million increase in the last 3 change packages are Door-specific requests, which I'll give you an overview of in the ensuing slides here. Okay, so our change package 4 request is for an investment of $470,000 to cover the cost of our internal audit function. This function is currently performed by a third-party service. It was initiated at the start of Project Next Door to establish a good control environment around the modernization of our tax system as well as our operations. Consequently, this cost is funded by the appropriation for, our capital appropriation for Project Next Door. So now that the system has been successfully implemented, we're now looking to bring this function in-house. So our purpose today with this request is to be able to fund this internally outside of our capital appropriation. Our change package 5 request is for an investment of $1,050,000 in our motor carrier services division to add 15 staff members and IT resources. The purpose for this request is we've noticed customer volumes have increased dramatically across all lines of business due to the outstanding service being provided by this division and the success of their one-stop shop concept. So the additional staff and IT resources are needed to provide support for the additional workload. Also, the revenue to the state has increased nearly 20% over the past 2 years, while obligations or investments in this division to support this division have decreased by 10% over that same period. So our last change package request, change package 6, is for an investment of $1,650,000 for our customer service operations to build on the success of their pilot call center augmentation project. This project was began in March with our vendor Net4. I suspect it comes as no surprise to anyone that we experience a high volume of calls, a significant spike in calls, in fact, during the individual tax season. And wait times as a result are extended, and this has resulted in increased abandoned calls, increased deflections, and just an overall poor customer experience at times as wait times have gone up 1.5 hours or more. Also, our workforce planning analysis has identified a gap of 15 to 25 full-time equivalents that are needed to meet our desired service levels. So our plan to improve wait times and to address call deflections is to be able to answer 80% of our calls within 15 minutes by having a vendor pick up about 1/3 of our annual volume in calls across 3 of our main call queues, and that would be individual tax, ID protection, as well as payment plans. So we believe that this plan will significantly improve our ability to serve the customer and ultimately improve the customer experience. So with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Actually, I just have a comment. On page 3, when you have the automatic taxpayer refunds, I'm going to argue with it that you need to change that ATR 2 to manual, because if it was automatic, we would not have convened in July.
This is, if I can just add to that. So giving money back to Hoosiers sounds easy and fun, and it's neither, right? Because it's a very complex process. It was something that we worked very, very hard on. The auditor, the treasurer, OMB, state budget. It was a Herculean effort, and we're very proud that we were able to do that. But it was it was quite a project.
Well, I knew how hard it was going to be on you, and that's why I voted against it, because I didn't want to give you all that work to do. And so, but thank you for that. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along that line, what was the total cost of doing the 2 ATRs, and how many were returned? How many checks were returned?
I don't know how many physical checks were returned because of bad addresses. Is that your question? I don't know that. We can get that for you. So the auditor of state issues the checks, and then we actually process the returns, and we have a process, so we can get that for you. It's not we'll get that for you.
And the cost?
For the whole program?
For both?
I don't have that number. 3.5 million?
Each time or total?
No. Total, I believe. I believe it was approximately $3.5 million. So we did about
roughly 1.75 million each time we did it? That's 3.5 million?
No.
Total?
So we issued about, of all the refunds, of the ATRs, approximately 1.8 million of them were checks. And the cost per check was, to produce it and mail it and all that, was approximately $1.60. I'm doing this off the top of my.
$1.60?
$1.60, $1.60 per check. Production.
So about 2.7 million then?
Right, but then there was also the cost.
Each time?
We only sent the checks once. We combined the 2 ATRs and the checks.
Oh, that's right, because we didn't have paper, so we had
That's
to
right.
delay the first time.
Right. So we did 2 rounds of direct deposits, May and August, and then the checks started rolling out in August and went through September. We were able to combine ATR 1 and 2 with the checks, so only 1 check went out.
And then when the checks come back, that doesn't go back to the general fund, right? Those, are they going to be held out for 10 years until they revert to the uncollected monies through the Attorney General's office and then eventually come back to the state after 10 years?
I can't speak exactly to the process of return checks because we have return checks in normal business operation as well. So when the return check comes back as undeliverable, we go through a research process to try to find a better address, although we have already done significant due diligence to scrub the address to make sure it's accurate. And then it is held that ultimately ends up in unclaimed property, if I'm not mistaken. I could get the details of what happens exactly to the funds.
So it could actually cost more than $1.60 to get the check to the right person eventually, if they were returned. A lot of manpower on your part.
Senator Brown, I think Director Jackson might have an answer for you on that.
Okay, then my last question is, I noticed you had, and I meant to ask, I think it was IDEM, not DNR, you have an increase to IoT. What is the SPD portion of that? The 900,000?
Seat charge for SPD.
The seat charge?
Is that, oh, that's what that is?
Yes.
Licensing? So
Exactly.
is that an increase over your charge to IoT? That's an intertransfer, I assume, right? So you're paying IoT for services?
And SPD for
Yes.
services.
Okay.
That's correct.
So is that 900,000 increase from last budget?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Because I noticed that in the last presentation I meant to ask. Do you know what
Yeah,
percent of an increase that is?
That I don't know, but this is our incremental cost of the change package that we have here is the incremental cost due to IoT and SPD rate increases.
Okay. I'll have to ask them, but I would like to know what that incremental increase has been over the last, I think it's appropriate that we account for all of the time that these interagencies, they're working. I've seen this before in others, but that's the second time I've seen it increase, and I'd like to know what it's based on.
Okay,
Probably not something you can answer. They're going to have to answer.
right.
All right, thank you.
Director Jackson.
Yeah, let me try to, maybe I can address all of those. When it comes to IoT and SPD, both of those primarily operate off of internal service funds where they get their funding by billing for their services to other agencies. IoT especially has seen huge increases recently when it comes to the contract that the state has with Microsoft. They've frankly been unwilling to really negotiate with us on their prices, and we have to pay what they're requesting. And so IoT has no choice but to pass along the user fees that we are being charged by Microsoft to each agency. And so essentially, how many employees does DOR have?
653.
Okay, so there's a seat charge of approximately, I think, $25 a month that IoT charges every one of their employees, every one of my employees, every statewide employee to cover the cost for, as an example, the Microsoft seat charges. You do that for database charges, phones, laptops, everything like that. And that's entirely how we fund that. But most of the increase we've seen recently out of IoT has been for Microsoft. And so we advised agencies to assume a 5% increase year over year for increased IoT chargebacks. When it comes to state personnel, essentially same model is used there for the HR staff that provide services to all state agencies. I want to say there's about, don't hold me to this, but maybe about 150 employees, HR employees that provide services to all agencies. Same thing, there's a monthly seat charge, and that's how we fund SPD. We do it that way as opposed to giving them a direct appropriation, because now we can adequately charge back those costs not only to general fund, but dedicated funds and federal funds as well. Your first question about the way we handle the abandoned property fund, every year, and this is all based on statute, but there's a transfer out of the abandoned property fund to the general fund. Essentially, we leave about a quarter's worth of the annual distributions out there at the end of a fiscal year, but everything else gets transferred over to the general fund per statute. That's actually one of the numbers that's built into the revenue forecast every year. It's traditionally in the ballpark of 25 to 50 million that we transfer over. And so to that point too, then anything extra that accumulates in there because of the automatic taxpayer refund just adds to what we would do that transfer to every year. I do not.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that was the last one on our agenda. So we'll meet again next Wednesday, the 14th at 10:30 in the morning in this room again. So with that, we will adjourn.